I just want to say right from the beginning, everything that I'm sharing today is really about the lessons I've learned. I hope, as Brett says, if any of this makes any sense to you or if it helps you in any way, I'll be really glad, but it does come from my personal experience. So, this journey that I've been on began from very, very broken beginnings. My childhood, which I'm going to share a lot more about tomorrow, was extremely broken and extremely dysfunctional. And it's only been by God's grace that He has grown me and has grown Sparrow into a flourishing movement which has been rooted in His love and very wise stewardship. The story is deeply personal, and so over the past 35 years, my life and calling have been shaped by triumphs and trials. Because when we see the photographs up there a bit later, and when I get to the end of what Sparrow's accomplished, I don't want you to have the wrong idea that it's only been triumphs. All of this has been learned with a lot of trials that we've gone through. But many of the most valuable lessons were learned the hard way. One truth has remained constant in this work that I've done, that good stewardship and good governance are essential to turning a God-given calling into lasting impact. Many people, and over the years I've experienced this, receive powerful visions, a deep sense of calling, but they struggle to see it take shape in a sustainable way. And in my experience, the missing link is often structure. It's not just passion or prayer, but governance, planning, and process that are required. So I've had to grow into this myself. Today, I believe that good governance is one of the most overlooked yet vital parts of any ministry and has definitely been the vital part of Sparrow's ministry or nonprofit. It's not about red tape and bureaucracy, as many of us want to look at, whether we're in business, working in the nonprofit sector, or in a ministry. It's about building a foundation that will allow your vision to endure, thrive, and truly serve people well over the long term. And at the heart of why we build this structure is love. A love that reflects the justice and mercy of Jesus. One of my favorite quotes says, "Social justice is one of the holiest Christian traditions. To honor, protect, and love humanity." This speaks to everything I believe Jesus has called us to do. It is about loving our neighbor in whatever form that takes for you. It doesn't have to be a sparrow. It can be your neighbor next door. It can be the person across the road. It could be that child in the classroom. And reaching out to the broken and forgotten, whatever they might look like. We sometimes want to fit those people into a box and then we'll love them. They often, very often, most of the time, do not fit into our boxes. And this is really what has defined Sparrow. In honoring, protecting, and loving humanity, we have seen how dignity can be restored. That restoration isn't just emotional, spiritual. It's made possible when compassion is paired with practical systems that make our work sustainable. So when we build with diligence, when we count the cost, as Jesus taught, and when we steward resources with integrity and clarity, then God can bless our efforts to bring real transformation. We just need to turn to Proverbs 21:5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Okay, so as I said right from the beginning, I've learned the lessons the hard way. I'm a dreamer. I'm a visionary. Those things don't usually go together with practicality. So Sparrow began in 1989, when I think a lot of you the side of the room were not even sort of thought of or not around. And it began during the old dark days of apartheid. And it began with 4 children on a Saturday morning in a church hall in Joburg Park of Johannesburg. I don't know how many of you Durban people have traveled up to Joburg, but Joburg Park at the lower end of Hillbrow. I was renting a little hall there when I started. At the time that I started Sparrow, I was a qualified teacher, teaching in a very poor white school in Johannesburg. I was very disillusioned by the apartheid system, and I was very disillusioned about teaching in a racially divided school. I was deeply unsettled by the injustices I saw every day. I felt a calling, a burden to reach out to the children in the townships whose lives were shaped by poverty, race, exclusion, and rejection. And what happened was that I used to go with my church at that time, which was in Bryanston, Johannesburg, on a Saturday morning to Alexandra Township. And I was right from the beginning, yes, we can pray before we go, but when we get there, I'm teaching English and reading and writing skills. I'm not going to have time to go around praying for people. Sorry. Because education was just so desperately needed. And I was approached by 4 parents when I was there on a Saturday morning to say, all these schools, in those days, remember, completely segregated, all these white schools with all the rumblings in the background about 1994 and the elections coming, all these schools now would open up to children of any color. And we really want our children to get into these schools. So how can you help us? And it was really tough, it's difficult to sometimes explain to young people, what those apartheid days were like. But there was so much red tape for these young people to get into these schools and so many hurdles. And if we look back and see what their parents had been through and how they're going to access this education, it was quite a tough one. So I was like, okay, I can do this. But each child has to pay 35 Rand a month. A lot of money in those days, by the way. I was tutoring a lot of more affluent white children who were paying me 35 Rand an hour. But 35 Rand a month was a lot of money for those parents. But why did I say they had to pay something? And this has just always been our belief at Sparrow since the day I started. I strongly don't believe in handouts. This needed to be a partnership. I wanted the parents and the children to feel that they were equals, not recipients of my handout. Dignity matters, and this was a small way of affirming it. It also meant that if those parents were paying, like any of us, if we're paying, there's a transaction, I'm going to expect a service. And they needed to be able to say to me, why did my child not do X, Y, Z, what? And they also had to commit to coming to meet with me on a regular basis. At that time, I had no bank account, no business plan, no understanding of the nonprofit world. All I had was a sense of purpose and compassion. So I began. Didn't take me long to realize that 140 Rand a month, even in those days, wasn't going to make my life sustainable. So I kept my full-time job. I had left teaching at that time. I was delivering lost baggage for the airways. And I did what I loved on Saturday mornings with these children. Something beautiful happened. These 4 children brought their friends, they brought their friends, and before we knew it, we had 27 children. We started in the August of 1989, and it became very clear to me that there was a real hunger from parents to get their children into better schools, specifically the former whites-only schools that were beginning to open under the pressure. And that's when I experienced my first miracle. And I think it's so important that, for me, that we see miracles in the everyday. And they often come in the form of people. And I also learned my very first lesson for anybody out there that's working in charity work, non-profit work, ministry. Networking is key. I love networking. I love meeting with new people. I love finding out about what people do. And it's so important. I always say we're really missing a lot out from, the Jewish people. They really understand networking well. Um, I think your church does it extremely well, Brett. So I organized a camp. I decided I'm going to take these 27 children, the visionary that I was, the dreamer that I was, I'm going to take these 27 children on a camp. The camp was going to cost 30 Rand for the weekend per child. The kids were going to pay 15. Where was the other 15 going to come from? I had to get out the telephone and not the cell phone. I had to get out the yellow pages. And I looked up some of my old school friends who'd gone into business. And I called the one guy and he said, come around and see me. And I went to see him and I told him the story. And he said, sure, I'll write out a check. I don't know, Matt, if we have to explain what a check is to the young people. He wrote out a check, I banked it, and then I thought, well, how am I going to get these kids to the camp? So I phoned up my old high school where I taught. As I mentioned, very poor white school. In fact, I think they have had less resources than Sparrow has today. And I said, could I use your school bus? I'm taking these kids on a camp, your combi. And they said, sure, you can, but the windscreen wipers don't work and there's no petrol cap. I said, it's okay, I'll make a plan, and we'll just pray that it doesn't rain. Bearing in mind it's November in Johannesburg. And I went and collected the bus, and praise the Lord, it didn't rain. But that's where the first miracle really happened. My friends that were teaching at the Saturday school with me came along on the camp, and while we were on this camp, I'll never forget the one guy, Colin Weeks, not a Christian, might I mention, and he said, what you are doing is fantastic. 27 kids, you're doing is fantastic. You should take this to the country. I'm like, okay, I've got 27. Let me just try with them. And he said, what you really need to do? This bridging the gap, this whole idea of taking these children from the township schools into the open white schools and putting the bridge, because it's about their dignity, in place, is what the country needs. You should speak to Dr. Agri-Claster. I was like, sure, yeah. Dr. Agri-Claster, the editor-in-chief of the biggest black newspaper at that time, the Sowetan newspaper. I said, Colin, I'll never forget this conversation. I said, Colin, it'll be easier for me to get an appointment with Nelson Mandela. And he said, no. My mom is a good friend of Agri's. She does a lot of PR work or marketing or something for Agri. She'll get you the appointment. I'm like, okay. About a week later, I get a phone call from Agri's secretary, Linda Frampton, who's become a good friend of mine over the years. And she says, Dr. Agri-Claster would like to see you in his office on the Thursday or something. I said, like, okay. She says, bring your presentation. I'm like, presentation? Like, I don't even know how to work a computer. Remember those days of DOS? Floppy disk. I'm like, typed out a little one-pager that I took with me, get into the office, to the most eccentric, dreamer, visionary person I've ever met in my life. And, so I'm kind of like trying to do a presentation, not quite sure what that entails. And he's under his desk, he's looking for stuff, he's calling his secretary. I'm like, this guy's not even listening to me, like, is there any point? And he finishes off and he takes my piece of paper and he says, puts it down on the table like this, and he says, I receive over 100 proposals a day on my desk. So, and I'm thinking, okay, here it comes. It's going to be a big no. He says, so why should I be thinking about your proposal? And I'm like, okay. And he says, I'll tell you why. He says, because I see your heart. God uses people to see right into us what we cannot see. He sees the potential. I'm sharing my personal story tomorrow morning, but I really came from a huge place of brokenness. No father figure in my life. Dr. Agri-Claster became that to me. This black man in apartheid South Africa became my mentor, my father figure, and the person that really believed in me. So then, what did Agri decide to do? He advertised under his nation building program in the Sowetan newspaper, and the following week, 250 children pitch up. And I'm like, okay, clearly this little church hall is not going to do it, so we have to find another building. And then eventually, there's 550 children. So what began with 4 children on a Saturday morning grew into something far greater than expected through a mix of God's favor, practical planning, and relentless compassion. Every learner contributed a small fee, and every staff member that came was paid. We put a plan together, we honored it. We didn't see this as a charity model. We all had the same idea. This was about dignity, equality, and shared commitment. And that principle became the foundation. That principle became foundational to everything that Sparrow would become. I have to mention here that the next very valuable lesson that I learned was from Alexander Fenter. Because with my lost baggage job during the week, I wasn't always that busy. Some days more than others. And I started working with, doing a little bit of work in the Jaweta community south of Johannesburg. And Alexander said something very important to me. Be teachable. In whatever you're going to be doing, be teachable. And don't tell people what they need. Find out what the needs are. And that really, really has stuck with me my whole life. So then, these parents that were coming to these parents' meetings on a Saturday morning, the 550, because we were having such fantastic results, over 66% of our children were getting accepted into the open white schools, they requested that I open up a full-time school. I went off to see Dr. Claster then, who'd become my mentor, and I said, this is what the parents have asked. And he was like, being the dreamer and the visionary, he's like, of course we'll do this. I'm like, Agri, it's like June of 1992. 6 months to open up a full-time school. We have to find a building. We have to do this. He says, the old Johannesburg market? He says, we'll just put up some shipping containers. We'll put some portaloos. I'm like, I don't think so. These parents are going to be paying 175 Rand a month for a private school. They're not going to be expecting that. So Agri then found us a wonderful building downtown Johannesburg, Elof Street Extension. And in 1993, we opened up the doors to 250 learners, each family paying 175 Rand a month, and parents attending termly parents' meetings to stay engaged and invested. So right from the beginning, the aim was clear: to help children from township schools to transition into mainstream education. But what was equally important to everything was that we had to do everything by the book. We understood that if Sparrow was going to last, if we were serious about making real impact, then passion alone wasn't enough. We needed structure. We needed governance. So we took the necessary steps. We did register an NGO with the Department of Social Development. We applied to SARS for all the correct nonprofit documentation, including the Section 18A, to ensure that we could assist our donors when they made large donations or small donations. We registered the school with the Department of Education firstly, so that we were complying, but secondly, because we would then receive a subsidy. You need money to run a nonprofit. It doesn't run without money. We employed qualified staff. We developed all the HR policies and procedures the hard way. Okay, I have to tell you that whole long story, about finding drunk staff in the toilets and not having policies. And how do you then deal with that? We paid our UIF and our PAYE, and we adhered to all labor laws. And most importantly, we established strong financial systems from day one, produced audited financial statements from the very beginning, and we didn't cut corners. So over the years, through God's amazing provision and generosity of faithful donors, Sparrow grew from a Saturday morning gathering into a movement of real, lasting impact. We were able to purchase land because Dr. Agri-Claster opened up the doors to the Anglo-American Chairman's Fund, and they gave us a very big donation of 2.5 million, which was going to buy the land and build the school. And then the first major trial came. In the late 1990s, we bought a piece of land in Sophiatown For any of you that don't know your history, if you go up and read about the forced removals in Sophiatown in the 1950s, which then was renamed to Triumph, and white people were moved into the area, and now the area was being renamed Sophiatown again. So there were a lot of people really scared. I mean, these were new changes in the country. And the people in the area objected. The white people objected to us building a school there. I thought it was just going to be smooth sailing. Buy the land, get the plans, get the lands approved, build the school, start the next year. End of story. We desperately needed that building. And these people objected. And I'd never, had a major court case. I've never been to, anything like this. I hadn't had anybody ever, do anything like this. And so it was a real trial for us. And it was going to cost 80,000 Rand to get a lawyer, money we didn't have. And miraculously, God provided a lawyer who did it pro bono. The objections were, of course, that we were going to disturb the bird life and we were going to make too much noise for the old age home next door. We won. They appealed. It took 4 years to build, and it then landed up costing us 13 million. But the amazing thing, we say these things, when God is taking us through the trials and we need to be patient and He's got a purpose. It's really tough when you're going through 4 years and you're like, where must we go next year? Where must we place these kids? It was a whole other saga about where we need to move to. And I remember when we started building, and I went there one Saturday morning when it was very quiet and there were no builders around, and it really is the most magnificent place. And I sat under these huge oak trees, and I was saying, like, what's up, God? Like, couldn't you have just made this happen 4 years ago? And it very gently said, yeah, if I'd done this 4 years ago, it would have been all about you. It would have been all about you, but it was actually all about me. And funnily enough, or not funnily enough, because we say that God is our provider, He did provide the 13 million to build that school. And that's another half an hour story, which we won't go into today. But we also managed to acquire during that time an old government school site, which became the home for our primary school. Very close to each other, 7 minutes apart. So some of the key milestones and achievements over the 35 years. We have had cultural exposure. We've taken 5 choir tours and 3 cricket tours to London. We registered a UK charity. We've registered the high school and built, as I said, the 13 million Rand high school and TVET college. We have a fully accredited TVET college, and we have 22 accredited training courses there. We deal with 400 neurodiverse learners who we support annually through different programs at our high school and our primary school. We work with 600 plus youth every year, training them in qualified accredited skills programs. We have on-site, this is our newest and most wonderful program, is that we have brought in mental health support after COVID. We have on-site registered counselors for learners and staff. I think sometimes the staff need it more than the learners. We offer employment to 130 full-time staff members every year and 20 interns. And we have just launched a new collaborative program in Limpopo, where I now live. So, ministry does need management. Passion is not enough. Ministry must be planned, must be governed, and we must be held accountable. To build something endures, you need to have a clear mission, good people who share your vision, financial transparency, governance and accountability, and above all, a teachable spirit and a willingness to grow. I do have to acknowledge those who have stood with me through this journey, because no journey like this is walked alone. My husband Peter, who's not here this morning but will be here tomorrow morning, who's been my life partner and a faithful steward, has been by my side through every decision, helping us honor God with our finances and structures. First with the very little, and now, by God's grace, with much. But beyond Peter, there is community. Friends who have counseled me, mentors who have guided me, prayer warriors who have carried me, staff and partners who have built this vision alongside me, and many who simply showed up in the hard seasons to hold me when I couldn't hold myself. My story is their story, and God has used each one of us to build Sparrow into what it is today. We track every cent, we report with clarity, and we partner with wisdom. We collaborate rather than compete. Because, and this happens too much in the NGO world, too much competition, because God's kingdom's work isn't about who gets the credit, it's about who is getting helped. Too often, ministry is reduced to charity. But my feeling is that we are called to justice, to empowerment, to dignity. Sometimes people ask, have you made it this far? And the truth is, we have been through the fire. We have faced financial shortfalls. We have a lot of bureaucratic red tape daily. We've had the heartbreak of children we couldn't save. We've had staff tensions. We've had personal threats. And we've had moments where the door was nearly closed. And yet we never gave up, and we were never alone. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but we are not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. It has been it has been our lived experience at Sparrow. God has carried us every time. So if there's anything I would like you to take with you today, is you can build a Christ-centered, impact-driven, legally compliant organization that both honors God and demonstrates excellence. You can stand in the gap, not just by giving financially, but by giving your expertise, your time, your business wisdom, your willingness to serve alongside others. We don't need to start from scratch. We need to start together. He who began a good work in you will carry it to completion. So let us be faithful, not only in having loving hearts, but also in developing wise hands and sound structures. May our ministries reflect both the compassion of Christ and the care he took in planning, leading, and equipping us for lasting impact. So let's go forward with courage. Let's go forward to serve and lead with heart and wisdom, trusting that God will hold us together every step of the way. Thank you.